Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. And today, have we got a treat for you? This lady she's just like treacle. She's just like treacle. Brilliant. Welcome to the show, Rachel Forbes.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here with you.
So, Rachel Forbes is an adoptee,
Mm-hmm.
a transracial adoptee, transcultural adoptee from
Yes.
Korea. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. From South
Um,
Korea. Yes.
and South Korea, and she's also a therapist. So we've just been having 3/4 of an hour getting to know each other, and I know from that conversation this conversation is just going to be delicious. So one of the things that Rachel's really into, and which has really helped her personally. So we're going to draw on her personal learnings. We're also going to draw on her professional learnings, helping other adoptees. Is this internal family systems
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? So do you call it a modality? Is it what?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. A therapeutic modality. Yep.
therapeutic modality, and it's something to do with the different parts of us,
Mm-hmm.
and the aim is, as Rachel puts it, to transform our relationship with our parts. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
that sounds fascinating. Let's kick the podcast off by getting you to kind of unpack that for us.
Yeah. Let's dive into some IFS.
Yeah.
Yeah. So IFS, internal family systems, it's a therapeutic modality that was founded by Richard Schwartz. And he originally was working with families therapeutically, but he soon discovered that we as individuals have our own internal family system, where we have these varying parts of ourselves that take on these particular roles, carry particular burdens. And he discovered that if we can transform these roles and relationships in families, we also have this capacity to do that within ourselves. So the belief is that we all have something called capital S self, our highest self, if you will, perhaps the divine within us, that which transcends our oneness. And self has these 8 qualities, hoping I can remember them all right now, that start with C. Self is calm, compassionate, courageous, with clarity, connected, creative, and confident. And one more that was 7, and connected, if I didn't already say that. And in addition to capital S self, the belief is also that we have these other parts of us, as you had mentioned. These parts are actually almost like their own little sacred beings within our bodies. I like to identify them as sort of like our humanity, whereas self is more connected to that which transcends our highest consciousness, the divine. Um, and these parts, they can take on these varying roles. They may carry particular burdens of trauma. They may just have these really quirky personalities of their own. But let me give you some examples. So we oftentimes have these protectors and we have these exiled parts. So protective parts, these are parts that are adaptive. They adapt, to survive, to help us to survive based upon what we've been through. So for example, a protective part might look like a rageful part, may look like a perfectionistic part, may look like a really high achieving part. And these protectors, they work really, really hard in their roles to ensure that we are safe, that we are cared for, and from their particular perspective, based upon what we've been through. And then we also have these exiled parts, which are usually the parts that carry trauma, oftentimes feelings of shame, feeling unlovable, feeling unworthy, feeling rejected, feeling alone, feeling powerless. And these are the parts that have had experiences in which that were really, really painful. And I love how Peter Levine puts this. He says that trauma is not necessarily only what we have endured, but having endured that without an empathic witness. So these are parts who have experienced, harm, pain in whichever kind of way, but in the absence of an empathic witness, which is where that trauma lies and is carried and remains in the body and person. So in this work, the belief is that capital S self has this ability to get to know these protective parts of ourselves, to also get to know these parts of ourselves that carry trauma, and in a way that is non-binary, meaning, without positive versus negative, from a positive versus negative perspective, but rather getting curious from a place of curiosity. Oh, that might be that C that I forgot.
Yeah.
Curiosity. Where, for example, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Have you ever played Trivial Pursuits?
I have not.
You've played played Trivial Pursuits. Okay. So this is going to be a bit tricky then. Okay. Trivial Pursuits is a like a knowledge game,
Mm-hmm.
and there are six subjects
Mm-hmm.
that are you ask questions on, and it's a board game, so you move around. So the if you imagine if you get a question right, you get the cheese that goes with that subject, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Is that like a reward?
sorry, that's the reward, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like a wedge of cheese.
Mm-hmm.
So each person starts the game with a little piece of plastic, a round
Mm-hmm.
piece of plastic, that has 6 holes in it. I'm just gonna. Why did I do
Are you
this?
going to draw it?
Yeah.
Great. Perfect.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got, and so it's ready. It's got 6 segments, and then so
Yeah.
when you get so I think sport. Let's say sport is blue, right?
Yep.
So you get, if you answer the sport question right, you get
Ah.
blue cheese, right? And you put
Yep.
the blue cheese goes into into one of the holes.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Got
sort of
it.
kind of all you need to know. So here's the thing. This is what I'm saying is, if we were to say that
Mm-hmm.
the capital S self,
Mm-hmm.
and the the uh, the the thing that is aware of all the rest. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's say that is the cheese holder,
Yes.
and the parts are the cheeses that fit in the cheese holder. Is that working?
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to emphasize the holder, because the self, yes, has the capacity to like hold all of these parts, to bear witness to all of these parts and hold in that particular way. But the self isn't necessarily made up of all the cheese.
Oh,
Does that
okay,
make sense?
right.
It's more that like parts are connected to self, but they're not self. And they don't make up self. They're just in relationship with each other and exist in a connected way, connected. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with another. I'm going to go with another metaphor, listeners, just in case I haven't fried your mind already. I'm just going to simplify it. Simplify it. So I came up with this last week. Trauma is a cocktail of toxic. Trauma is a toxic cocktail of tough feelings like anger, rage, insecurity, and fear. But we are the cocktail glass, not the contents that are in it.
Yes. Yes. That's it. Exactly. We are not so I love that, because, for example, if you've got a part of you that's really rageful in response to trauma you've experienced, it doesn't mean you are a rageful person. It means there's a part of you that carries rage. Does that make
It
sense?
does.
Yeah.
So our feelings are not our identity.
That's
Our
right.
trauma is not our identity.
That's right.
So we're putting clean air between who we are
Mm-hmm.
and how we feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we are less embroiled in it.
Mm-hmm.
And because that's when we get really scared, when
Yeah.
we think we're gonna drown in our
Right.
tears, we're gonna
Yeah.
drown in our trauma, we're
Right.
gonna get I'm thinking about the rib tides, that pull
Getting pulled. Yeah.
that they pull us under. The insecurity kind of pulls us under, and then we have to get
Yeah.
rescued by David Hasselhoff or whoever's working on the beach that day. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. And in IFS, the term they often use is hijacked, right? Getting hijacked by these parts where they take over and it's overwhelming in that way.
yeah,
Yeah. And so self has this ability to notice this, and we can create internal space both in body. So there's also some in body work that's incorporated in IFS, which is why I love it so much. Um, as well as, mentally and emotionally. So like one thing that we start to notice when we start to get to know a part, for example, is noticing where you might carry a particular feeling in or around your body. So where you might feel, where do you carry the rage? How does it show up? Do you get hot, right? Do you get tense? Does it live in your chest? And we start to just bear witness to how our bodies are responding. And the belief is sort of like that our physical responses are these portals into the emotional. So if we get
wow,
curious, yeah, if we get curious about what's happening in our bodies and actually literally ask it, what is it that you want me to know right now? The rage might say all these profanity,
yeah,
etc., whatever it may be, right? And then we get curious about, oh, I see how angry you are. Tell me more.
yeah,
What's happened to you for you to feel this way? Or what are you doing for Simon when you voice all of this? What is it that you're trying to do? Right. And usually a protective part will say, well, I got to make sure that he doesn't feel so afraid, right? For example. And we get to notice, oh, you're actually not intentionally a harmful part. You're actually really protective, and you actually genuinely really care about how I feel and my well-being,
yeah.
right?
So that's very interesting, because when you said the word hijack,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I made a connection with something a mentor of mine talks about. Um, she talks about the internal terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
Now, terrorist, it's quite simplistic. Terrorists bad, right? There's a judgment
Right,
included
right,
in that.
right.
So what you're saying is we are not judging. You don't you said hijack. You didn't say terrorist. I said terrorist. Terrorist is judgment. What you're saying is that the hijackers are actually trying to keep us safe. They're not. They're good guys. They're good guys, not bad guys.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In their particular minds, given what role they've taken on and what they know, right? Oftentimes these protective parts of us, they believe most of the time that it's just them and that you have relied on them and will rely on them only throughout your lifetime. But what they don't know is that there's, let's say, a Simon inside who's not a part. And they don't know that there's another being in here that has the ability to take, not only protect the part that they're trying to protect, but also take care of and bring healing to that part. So let's say, let me give like an example. So let's say we have a rageful part that can show up when we feel really ashamed, right? We feel like this is reflective of who I am as a person. The rage steps in and says, oh, we just can't have that. We can't allow this person to feel that shame, because being in that shame is so excruciating. So instead, we're going to attack and fight, right? But what self can do is acknowledge, hey, I see how hard you're working to keep that little one safe who carries all of this shame. And the shame has probably come from somewhere, something that's happened long ago, where they were scolded and told that, made them, where they were feeling like, this is not something I made a mistake. I didn't make a mistake. I am actually inherently a bad kid. is the belief that oftentimes can get carried with shame. And this protective part is saying, this rage is saying, I'm never going to allow this person to feel this way again because that was too painful. But instead we say to the rage, again, I see how much you care for this little one inside. I want you to know that what if there's another way for us to take care of this little one who carries so much shame? What if I could help that part? And the rage was like, oh, I didn't know that was possible. I don't know if I can trust you because I've been the one in charge this whole time. So we build some trust with the rage. And then we start to get to know this little one. What's happened to you? Tell me. I see how ashamed you're feeling. What's happened for you to feel this way? And then we start to bear witness to that moment in time. What happened? And we actually have the ability to bring to that part what it was that part really needed in that moment that part never received. Let's say that little one who felt ashamed, which may have been something like, hey, I see that you've made a mistake here, but I want you to know that you're still a really good kid. And I'm taking that line particularly from Derek Scott, who's an amazing IFS practitioner, but he talks about this with shame. And so there's this way for us to work with our protective parts who think that they're the only ones who have the capacity to save us or keep us safe, when in fact they have, unfortunately, oftentimes harmful external impact, right? When we're rageful, we also can hurt other people, but in their mind, they feel like this is the only way. So if we can find another way to be with the shame so that the rage doesn't have to work so hard, it's quite amazing what can happen in the inner world. So I hope that example was clear. I know I jumped around a little bit there, but
yeah. So I was sharing the experience I had that led me to restart the search for my birth mother, and it was sitting in the therapist's chair. The therapist asked me a question about, was I looking for my birth mum? The idea popped into my head that my birth mother, or picture popped into my head of me opening the door of the therapist's room, seeing my birth mother and her, in inverted commas, air quotes, whatever, rejecting me again. And then I went stone cold in fear, and then red hot in anger. So that's presumably some parts play out, right?
Yes. We would say a part, like a protective part that stepped in with some rage, that carries some rage, and a part that felt really afraid. And it does sound, if you notice the fear came first and then the rage stepped in, it sounds like the rage stepped in protection of the part that felt really afraid.
Yeah.
If that would make sense to you.
Yeah. It did. And the rage won because I felt that I couldn't have this fear hanging over me. I actually had to I had to find out. I had to restart my search. And then, unfortunately, I found that she died, but the subsequent letters about the teddy bear revealed to me the truth, and revealed to me how wrong I'd been, that the teddy bear was a consolation prize, and no, it was a symbol of her love. And she was in she was in a desperate state, disempowered, at the mercy of others, and very putting me before her, putting my needs before her, in her view of the day, the view of the day in 1967 being one parent bad, two parents good.
Yeah. And it sounds like too that in that moment, or in that realization that there was love towards you, there was real care in her decision making, that your rage softened.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be quite a big understatement. It went.
It went, meaning it disappeared, it went away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the volcano of anger that had gone off 8 years before had immediately shut down. So I said she didn't love me enough to keep me, and then all the swear words, right, as the volcano exploded. The lady
Mm-hmm.
that I spoke to said, I don't think you're right. I'm a mum, Simon. I don't think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
I saw um, the that she was right. The
Yeah.
the volcano stopped uh, erupting. There was a little white bit of smoke coming out of the top, and the tears that went rolled down my face as I
Yeah.
read the letter from my birth mother about the the the, the teddy bear. Um, that water put out the storm, put out the fire inside.
So beautiful. So, so beautiful. I love that metaphor. It's really beautiful.
So I'd love to hear you mentioned that the one of the most healing times for you was around the was around the time that you conceived your daughter, which was coming up 7 years ago. Well, yeah, over
Yeah.
7 years ago, because she's coming up seven, so 7 months,
Yep.
7 years plus 9 months. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to share that. I also, just before we dive into that, um, it's so powerful. Just back to this beautiful metaphor you just shared, and your story too, is when you mention the tears and the softening, and the what I'm hearing is so much like compassion entered that sphere, entered that moment in time for you. And that empathy, I think, is what we're really talking about in healing. Both, it sounds like simultaneous compassion towards both you and towards her, which is
It was
really
deeper than that.
powerful. Yeah. Tell me more. What do you mean?
It was the oneness.
Mm-hmm. Can you say more?
Yeah. Um, Love is the absence of separation. It's
Mm-hmm.
the felt sense of oneness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I have a couple of different metaphors for this. Um,
We're here for it.
yeah. I want to get onto your story about the concept.
We'll
So
come back to that.
I'm a swimmer, right? She's a
Mm-hmm.
therapist, ladies and gentlemen. She's a therapist. This is what she does for a living. She gets people to talk. So I'm talking when it's supposed to be. That's great, isn't it? So I'm a swimmer. I
Mm-hmm.
swim most lunchtime. And around Christmas time, my pool is shut. So I have to go somewhere else. And it's a 50-meter, approximately 65-yard long pool. It's a big pool.
Mm-hmm.
And they can, but halfway down the pool is a massive plastic riser that comes out of the floor of the
Oh,
swimming pool
wow. Mm-hmm.
to divide one big pool into two little pools
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so that they can have more than one race going on, right? So they
Sure.
can have,
Sure.
yeah. So two pools. When the barrier, when the it's like rock hard big plastic thing. You can walk on it. It's like about 7 foot across. You can walk across it. When it sinks down into the bottom of the pool,
Mm-hmm.
its wall sinks down to the bottom of the pool. Two pools become one.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read that letter,
Mm.
and Patricia Joan Flower, became one. We were one.
Yeah.
There was no separation between us. So it was like empathy involves two people.
Yes.
Relationship involves two people.
Yes, there's
But
an
there
exchange.
was no empathy needed. There was no relationship needed because the two became one.
It just
And
was.
which is
Yeah.
one. And that's not just me and her.
Right.
That's when this phrase that I use all the time, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience.
Oh, yeah.
We're one spiritual being having whatever it is,
Human experience, right?
7 billion different human experiences. We've gone from 7 billion to one. And I felt that in before rugby matches. I felt that in rock concerts.
Yeah. Yep.
It's the oneness.
Yes. Yes.
It's a felt
The
thing,
isness, if you
the
will.
isness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. So profound. So now I'm curious if you'll do a podcast on the why. Why is it that these spiritual beings are having these human experiences? We don't have to get into it now, but something to think about.
Yeah. Um, I haven't even, no, I couldn't even give that a go. Maybe later down the line.
Yeah, later down the line.
Yeah. Well, but that's
Yeah.
good if because I can't answer that question. So maybe you can answer that question.
Oh, no,
We
I
do the
can't. I've been wondering for some time and I've picked many a brains about it, but I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. So I know, was there another
No.
metaphor? Oh.
There was, but it's gone. So let's go back to conceiving. Do you mind me asking what your daughter's name is, or would you rather keep it
Yeah.
private?
Her name is Bailey. Her name is Bailey. And she so around the time of conception of Bailey, and unknowingly, of course, I had pursued a search for my birth mother, and I had a good amount of information, but the agency had finally, and also let me back up a little bit. During this time when I pursued the search, I was doing a lot of what I call womb work. So I was doing a lot of the parts work, particularly in relationship to sensations I had been feeling in my, womb area and my pelvic womb area. And in the parts work, what I discovered in that part of my body was that I carried this deep, deep sadness from my birth mother. Her sadness, her sorrow, I felt like there was an apology coming from her almost. And I was able to extend a lot of compassion. Interestingly, similar to what you just shared, I really felt for her, with her, and I was able to just extend so much like forgiveness and compassion towards her in a way that I hadn't accessed before. And so around this time, interestingly enough, I also heard back from the agency that they had reached my birth mother. She unfortunately was not in a place to reconnect. She has now a family of her own. And I don't think they know anything. I actually recently just learned that they know nothing about me, which carries a lot of shame culturally, which can carry a lot of shame culturally in Korea. And so she has decided right now it's not the time. I'm not ready. The door seems to be mildly open, but I've at this point left the ball in her court, and I have no resentment towards her. Total, so much understanding towards her experience and whatever she might be carrying. But around the time of both offering compassion internally for myself and also for her, and hearing back from the agency, I conceived my daughter unexpectedly, and it just felt like just really powerful, ancestral, full circle, coming back and returning. And it's still to this day the story that I tell when I talk about how, the time during which Bailey was conceived. And it's really, really such an experience, being a mother myself. And, so much compassion is felt, or at least in my experience, I felt so much compassion for my birth mother carrying this baby and developing this bond, both biologically, but also just emotionally and spiritually with this baby. And yet, knowing that at some point you're going to have to separate from this baby, I can't imagine having to endure that. So that too was an opening for me to continue to extend this connection, connectedness, understanding, compassion towards my birth mother and her experience. Yeah.
Did you feel it physically? Was there a physical? Was there a physical? Yeah, I'm going to say manifestation, but I don't really want to say that word. But yeah, okay.
Totally.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
can you explain what it felt like?
Are you referring to like the sensations that led me to the parts work, or like in my womb, uterine area, or are you referring to like
I
in
don't know.
pregnancy?
I don't know. I'm just.
Yeah.
I shared with you my hot and cold thing when I was in the
Yeah.
doctor's chair. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering whether you felt
Something
around that time.
sensationally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sensation.
Totally. I mean, like what led me to do the womb work, this is what I call it, was I was having severe, severe menstrual cramps to a degree that I had never experienced before. And so with IFS, identifying, physical sensation as a portal into the emotional, I of course started to get curious. What's going on? What am I carrying? I actually later found out it was endometriosis, but I'm also curious as to how much, the endometriosis is in relationship to, the trauma, my adoption trauma, in essence. Because so much ancestrally gets passed down in utero. And so I thought that was fascinating. I don't have like conclusive evidence, hard evidence around this, but it's sort of a
Yeah.
theory I have. But when I feel the grief of my birth mother, I really still feel it in, this pelvic area. I also feel a heaviness in my chest, a weight on my shoulders. And so there's this like almost like burdensome feeling, this heaviness that I feel when I connect with her sorrow and her grief. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. Um, have you ever heard of a book called Power versus Force by David R. Hawkins?
No, I'm so embarrassed that I don't know any of these beautiful books that you have shared.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
He he has a scale of human consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
which he um, devised through kinesiology,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and it goes from. And the first part of the book is describing all his method.
Mm-hmm.
The second part of the book is describing the scale.
Mm-hmm.
It goes from 0 to 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Above 200 is life affirming. Below 200 is life detracting.
Mm.
And it's a logarithmic scale. So, if you put a scale of 0 to 1,000, I wrote it down on if you drew that scale
Mm-hmm.
on a piece of paper, the piece of paper would be, if it was A4, it'd be 300 millimeters high, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it would look like, but the difference is it's a logarithmic scale, so it's actually it's massively high,
Mm.
huge, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were trying to draw it on a piece of paper, you'd need a paper probably 3 miles high, yeah,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get the how vertical, almost vertical it is.
Mm-hmm.
0 is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Shame is 20.
Mm-hmm.
Anger's 50.
Mm-hmm.
Unconditional love's around 500, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Pride's 180. And it's an incredible, and the great spiritual avatars, Buddha, Krishna and Jesus are at 1,000.
1,000. Is it clear around what would describe or encompass 1,000? Like, you know how when you said unconditional love, shame, like, is there a word for 1,000? A descriptive word?
Pure consciousness.
Yeah. Wow.
I guess that's my best go at it.
Yeah.
But the fact that shame is 20, you talked about shame. It is that central thought.
Yeah.
I'm not good enough.
Right.
Sits with shame. Sits with 20. And it's incredibly disempowering.
Yeah.
So, you know what? If you've got a hot air balloon, got some people in a hot air balloon, they'll put sandbags, they put sandbags to keep the thing down,
down,
keep it down on the ground, and just keep on throwing them in, and that's what I see happening in certain circles, should we say, certain adoptee circles, where like we're not helping each other rise.
Yeah, to lift and to rise. Well, and I think where we get stuck there too is the first important part of, let's say, unburdening a part that carries a lot of shame is feeling seen, witnessed, understood. And I think what can happen in a lot of adoptee spaces is there's this first piece that's happening of, this has happened to me, this is how I feel. And then people chime in and say, yeah, this is how I feel. Me too. This is what's happened to me. And there's a witnessing that happens there. But there's more to that, right? The witnessing is a part, it's a really crucial, imperative first part of the process of bringing, I hate to say healing, because it's usually not. Healing isn't necessarily what we imagine it to be, where everything is like perfect once we've addressed it. We're actually just bringing connectedness and compassion and presence to these feelings when I'm talking about healing. That the witnessing is important, of saying, I get that happened to me too. I feel that way also. And I'm really mad about it and I'm really hurt about it. But then the next piece, I think, is sort of what perhaps we're touching on a bit, is the connectedness. It's this empathy that's understanding and loving and can offer, in essence, an alternative perspective. That in fact, you are enough. You are inherently worthy of love. It is in essence your birthright, and it is inherently part of your being to be loved and to be lovable. But what I've found is that before that invitation can be received, the witnessing needs to happen first. Because the trauma lies in experiencing this in the absence of an empathic witness. So someone to say,
yeah,
I see how you felt, how you might feel that way.
So let me try and connect some dots, and you can tell me if I'm trying to stretch it too far, right? So you talked about the origins of IFS, as in a family, the parts in a family, the roles in a family. And then you talked about actually looking at the parts within one person. I'm thinking about this witness. What about you? So far, you've just been talking about somebody bearing witness to us in an adoptee space.
Mm-hmm.
What if we can bear witness to our own stuff?
Yes,
So
we can.
we can. So this is
Yeah.
going back to this idea of separating
Yes.
ourselves from our trauma.
Yes. Yes,
So
this
that
is
we
the
become
parts work.
the parts where we come in the witness,
Mm-hmm.
the witness to the part.
Yes, of
Am
our
I
own.
just relaying out what you said to me in my words and asking you if you agree?
I totally agree. And I'm so glad you brought us back, because sometimes I can go off in my little IFS world. But yes, that's exactly it. And what I want to point out too that's important is, yes, we absolutely have this capacity to bear witness to our own parts, to our own traumatized parts, to our own inner children, and bring that deep empathy, understanding, and healing towards these parts of ourselves. And we also need this from other people. It's not exclusive to, we are solely responsible for healing ourselves and that's it. It is because of the oneness, right? The oneness exists within ourselves and within each other. And so that's what I'm talking about by connectedness, is like I am you, you are me. And you're seeing me, knowing me in this unconditionally loving way is also vital, because we inherently also need connectedness, because we are one in essence, right? We need each other because we are all connected in this way. And we have the ability to bring this to ourselves. So it's both. It's a communal effort and an internal effort.
Yeah. I can be a little bit either or, but it's not. It's a both. Yeah.
Both. Totally.
So just taking that a little bit further, we've talked about empathy towards our bio parents, oneness with them. What about our adoptive parents?
Yeah. What about them? What
Well, whenever I go near this place, I feel that I need to kind of. There's a particular story that I go to because it's what we call third partying. So what I mean by third partying, so I don't want to come across as critical to anybody, right? So when third party. So
Sure.
what third partying is a thing that I heard from a sales guy once, which is you've got to like separate. You've got to be on the client side, the potential client side, and you've got to third party it. I don't know if I can explain it that way. So forget about that. Scrub that. If I edited this podcast, I would edit that bit out, but I don't, listeners. So did you ever hear of a guy called Wayne Dyer? So Wayne Dyer was a self-development guy in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, zeros, and he died a few years ago. Him and his siblings and his mother were abandoned by an alcoholic father. I think his father was alcoholic. They were abandoned by the father. And Wayne Dyer held on to this rage towards his father. There was a rage brewed, and anger and rage brewed, and he held on to it. He ended up at his father's grave, and he was going to pee on that grave. Ranted and raged at his dead father's grave. Got it all out of his system. Or he was getting out of his system, and then suddenly, boom, he had a spontaneous forgiveness of his father.
Mm-hmm.
And he credits that epiphany, that moment, that spontaneous thing that happened to him as being the thing that set his career on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of stuff with parents, with adoptive parents.
Similar feelings.
I see a lot of, yeah.
Meaning the adoptee towards adoptive parents, or the other way? Yeah. 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 Yes. And that's too has a lot of layers, and a lot of which may have like personal circumstances that
Yeah.
we may not get to fully dive into. But similarly to birth families and birth mothers, birth parents, and their humanity, their life experiences that have contributed to the decisions they've made, the same with adoptive parents, the same with adoptive families. And this does not mean we're forgetting or negating any kind of harm that may have been caused from adoptive families, but rather,
We're
yeah,
not saying we're not saying they were right. But
correct.
somebody said something like, resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Oh, I haven't heard that, but
Yeah.
I get that.
I don't
I
know.
get that.
I butchered the quote slightly, but it's like it doesn't do us any good.
Right. Well, and it's so what that means then, right? For example, if we've got adoptive parents who may have caused significant harm,
Yeah.
whenever a person causes harm, we've got harm parts that are harmful, right? They too have their own protective purpose within that person. So, meaning what's being done to an adoptee usually has nothing to do actually with the adoptee themselves, like in their personhood, but more so about what the adoptive parent has been through and how the adoptive parent is feeling. And so, in that, there's some separation there by this actually has nothing to do with me, that I think is really important to notice. And that there's a way to both extend compassion towards ourselves as adoptees, right? If we've been the recipient of harm, how can I help those parts of me that have felt, so whatever the feeling may be? And also, what needs to happen for me to feel safe in this relationship so that I'm not so that this perpetually harmful dynamic is not continuing to happen, right? And so there are things that we are responsible for as adoptees and things that we are not, but we can also reclaim empowerment in the spaces where we're not responsible for certain things, like harm being caused towards us. Does that make sense?
I think so. Let me try and link it to another couple of things that I saw on your website that we mentioned about discussing. So you use this word self-awareness, right? So self-awareness is one of those phrases that we bandy around, like trauma and healing, and sometimes we don't really define, or it's
Yeah.
just one of those things. So
Yeah.
so so to me, on one level, self-aware might be looking at how I relate with my mother.
Mm-hmm.
Because unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
my father died. I'm talking about my adoptive,
Mm-hmm.
my dad. He died just over 6 years ago. So, so self-awareness, right? It might
Mm-hmm.
be. So we're trying to sort some stuff out at the moment for my mum, and some family stuff to do with money, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And So self-awareness on one hand would be looking at me and how patient I'm being, for example, because we've been starting this process to sort this money thing out, this tax thing out, inheritance tax. We've been looking at that since kind of last September. And so on one hand, self-awareness is me being aware of how I'm being about this, how I am with my mother about sorting them. So that's what, on one level, self-awareness is looking at our own behavior. And then on another level, self-awareness is being aware of ourselves, as in, you know, what you started off with. Self with a capital S. And what I mean by self is it is awareness. So I am aware of my desk. I'm aware of your picture. I'm aware of the thoughts. I'm aware of the words coming out because I can hear them coming out of my mouth. I'm aware of the pressure between my arm and my chest. So what I'm aware of. So most of the time we are identified with our thoughts. So we say, I am anxious, or our feelings, I am insecure, or our role, I am a podcaster. You know, we get identity very confused with name. Like, as I say, I am Simon Ben, but I was David Anthony Flower, right? So what I truly am never changes. So I'm not my name. I am at the moment a podcaster, but I've only done it for like 2 years, so that's not essential to myself. I am, yeah, I'm quite relaxed at the moment, but I'm not always relaxed. Sometimes anxious, so that's not essential to me. So self is the self-aware. The self is awareness, not what we're aware of. It's saying, I am. That's the being. Anything that comes after the I am is not essential to us. Does that make any sense?
It does make sense. It does. And I love how you name these different, you know, when we talk about self-awareness, these different kinds of self-awareness. I'm hoping I'm understanding you correctly, that on the one hand, there's this self-awareness in which we are conscious, in essence, of our behavior, right? Our humanity, in essence. If we're talking about parts, it's like our parts. How they feel, and also how they have impact on other people, right? And then there's the consciousness. There's that awareness is the isness. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the isness.
Yeah. So the isness and the oneness. Yeah.
So how do you see that self-awareness, awareness of self? And I'm asking you because you'll give it in a different way, and you'll use a different metaphor, different story, different pointing at. Because why this is a big deal for me is, again, it's saying it's putting some distance between us and our trauma. So it's saying, I am. That's it. I am.
Yeah.
I am traumatized. No, the trauma isn't me. I am not my trauma. I am not traumatized. I am that I am. Traumatized bit is a feeling that comes and goes, and it's that toxic cocktail of insecurity, fear, and anger.
Well,
and it's ever present.
Yes, that's right. It does pass, it comes and goes, and it's a human experience that our bodies carry. I guess our spiritual beings might carry in this human body these traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. And going back on that, I was saying, right, and we are one spiritual being having 7 billion human experiences, right?
Right.
So the trauma is in the human experience,
Right.
but that's not who we
are. Right.
So why does that matter? Because it seems to really matter to me, but when I try
Why
and
does it
explain,
matter to you?
why does it matter to me? Because that's a great shrink question, by the way. Yeah, you see, do you see what Rachel did there? I asked her a question, she turned it straight back on me. Brilliant. That's self-awareness. That's that's Rachel awareness. Why it's important to me is because I thought I was the trauma. I thought I was going to be buried by the trauma. I thought the trauma was going to overtake me. I thought I was going to drown in the tears.
Yeah, there's the rub, right? It's like it's restorative of hope, restorative of faith. It is liberating to know this, Yeah. I understand that, why
I
that's
never thought
important.
about it that way. So I'm going to thank you for asking
Yeah.
me that question, for turning that question back on me.
Well, I loved the question, but it wasn't mine, so I had to give it back to you. It was a great question because I had never, go ahead.
There's some people. Yeah, it's funny you should say that. I'm thinking now about. I'm actually thinking about business stuff from years ago. Well, you don't know. I know. Okay, so this is what happened. So I would speak to somebody like a marketing consultant or something like that, right? Or a business coach. And before I knew what coaching was about, and I'd ask them the question, and when they turned it back on me, I'd be going like, "Why do you think I'm paying you? I'm paying you for answers, not questions."
Well, good thing this isn't that same dynamic. I'm not. But I mean, I thought that was a really deep, great thought-provoking question, and it wasn't mine. So,
and it is, right? So this is, I told you this, I shared this with you a little bit before when I hit the record button. I have even recently got angry about being angry. I did used to, a lot of the time, I used to worry about being worried. So was I traumatized about being traumatized?
That's a good question. Well, what I'm hearing is that there's almost like this managing part that responds to your big feelings for whatever reason, I don't know. And it sounds like you could get curious about why it feels so concerned about these feelings. What is it afraid will happen if you were to really feel them?
So I think there is something there. But as I think this through, I actually think it comes down to what I'm trying to do with this podcast.
Can you say more? Yeah.
Well, I see fellow adoptees struggling.
Yeah.
I felt that. And separating my trauma from me, or the trauma from me, or my feelings from me, or that separation has done me the world of good. And that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
That's
For adoptees.
For adoptees. And that's what I want the podcast to do,
Mm-hmm.
is I want it to, like somebody said to me the other day, you don't take us all the way, Simon. Well,
Interesting.
I can't take you all the way. And I came up with this like 3 years ago, and it's one of my proudest little sayings. There's no such thing as a second-hand insight. If I could give every adoptee the self-love that is their birthright, the separation from trauma that is their birthright. And I love what you said about that, right? So I'm using your birthright thing back, and that's great. I would. If I could take you all the way, listeners, I would. But I can't. There's no such thing as a second-hand insight. We have to have them ourselves. And that actually is a big part of why I'm so keen and relentless with this podcast, because something happened to me when I was talking to my mentor, Liz, 12 years ago. And I said, I want your job. I want to help other people. So this is like, it's the classic thing. And
it is.
It's the same. I'd hasten, well, should ask you a question instead rather than just making a suspicion. Is to what extent, maybe not a yes or no question, to what extent is your wanting to share, wanting for others what you've, the healing that you've had for yourself, to what extent is that a reason that you're a therapist?
Same as you, Simon. I feel the same way. It's that, just like you're saying, it's that classic paying it forward, and if we have this treasure, why not share it with whomever may also want to receive it? It feels like selfish if I were to hold on to it just for me. And, these things have a ripple effect. When you can empower, inspire, or offer to another person, it impacts, of course, how they see themselves and how they treat other people, which has a ripple effect on all of the people who they get in touch with. And so it has this enormous ripple effect. And I feel the same way. Totally. Yeah. And I feel grateful that I feel like it's such a gift that we have this opportunity to do that, that I feel nourished by doing this. So it's like, what's the better position? There couldn't be a better positioning or job, because I love this and it's soulful for us. There's this really deep understanding, connection, belief that this has this incredible healing, transcending capacity. And isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That feels like a great place to start.
Yeah, I think so too.
As usual, listeners, links in the show notes to Rachel's website and her socials. And it's been gorgeous. We're doing this on a Saturday. I don't normally do recordings on a Saturday, so this has been a real treat.
Oh, I feel so honored that you were willing to take out time on a Saturday to meet with me. Thank you so much, Simon. It's a treat for me too.
It's true. It is nourishing. It is nourishing. I put on social this week that we hit 50,000 downloads, and somebody,
wow,
a lady called Paula, sorry, Paula, if you're listening. I'm terrible with surname. I think it's Paula Grooven. She's born in South Africa, lives in Ireland now. She came on the show. Great lady. And she said, "Oh, you must find that very validating." And I thought, well, I get my nourishment out of the conversations. That's where I get my kick.
Yeah, this is that connectedness, and it's, yeah, I get that.
Thank you, listeners. We hope that you found this nourishing too. And I guess if you're still listening, whatever you are, an hour or so, whatever into, then you did, or else you would have turned off and listened to another podcast. So thank you, listeners, and thank you, Rachel. Been lovely.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Speak to you soon, listeners. Bye.